Rain fell in sheets over the quiet street that night. A black car sat parked outside a small apartment, its engine still running. Inside that car was a man the whole city feared. His name was Haesol. Tall, pale, still as stone, wearing a tuxedo he was supposed to be married in the very next morning. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be at a grand hall across the city, surrounded by powerful people raising their glasses to a wedding that would join two empires forever. Instead, he sat in the dark, watching rain slide down the glass, staring at a door he had no business finding. 12 hours before his wedding, the most feared man in the city stepped out into the storm and knocked on the one door he was never meant to knock on. The door opened. A woman stood there in a soft robe, flour dusted across her hands, warmth spilling out behind her from a kitchen that smelled like home. Her name was Catherine Cook. Deep brown skin, soft curves, tired eyes that still held a spark of fire. And the moment she saw him, that fire turned to ice. "You," she said. Her voice was flat and cold. "You have some nerve showing up here, after everything you let them do to me. Get off my step." She moved to shut the door. And Haesol, the man who had never begged for anything in his life, put his hand against that door and said one word: "Please." What happened in the months before this night that turned a warm woman cold and a cold man desperate? What did she discover about him that made her slam a door in his face? And why was a man who could command an entire criminal empire with a single whisper now standing in the rain, begging to be let into one small apartment? Stay with me all the way to the end, because before this story is over, you will understand exactly why the most dangerous man alive threw away everything he was born to protect, and the woman he wanted might never forgive him for it.
Let us go back 3 months before that rainy night. Catherine Cook stepped into the glass tower on her first week, clutching a coffee in a folder, sure she had finally landed somewhere she could build a real life. She was good at her work, faster than most. She caught mistakes nobody else saw. But she carried one small crack inside her that she never let anyone notice. She did not trust powerful people. She had been burned before, in another city, by another important man who smiled while he used her. So she kept her walls high and her guard higher. On her first day, she watched something she never forgot. The elevator doors opened, and 2 large men stepped out ahead of everyone else. They cleared the space without a word. Conversations died. A man who was laughing went silent mid-sentence. Every head turned down toward the floor, as if looking up might cost them something. Then he walked through. Haesol, tall, pale, unhurried. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at anyone. He did not have to. A single quiet man on the top floor, and yet an entire room of grown adults held its breath until he was gone. "Who is that?" Catherine whispered to the woman beside her. The woman did not even turn her head. "That is Mr. Haesol. You do not speak to him. You do not look at him. You do your work, and you pray he never learns your name." Catherine laughed a little, thinking it was a joke. It was not. She learned quickly that the top floor was a different world. Men came and went who did not look like businessmen. Deals were spoken about in low voices behind closed doors. Once she saw a rival company executive shaking so badly he couldn't hold his glass, all because Haesol had looked at him for 3 full seconds and said nothing at all. This was not just a company, and Haesol was not just a boss,
But Catherine still knew, still on the outside, only understood that the top floor was cold and the man who ran it was colder. What no one in that tower knew was the reason he was so cold. Haesol had grown up in a house of fear and silence, and only one person had ever made it warm: his mother. She used to leave a plate of food outside his door on the nights his father's business ran late, covered with a cloth to keep it warm. No words, just a quiet reminder that someone in the world was thinking of him. Then she died when he was 12, and in all the years since, in a whole empire of people who bowed to him, not one single person had ever left him food again. He had told himself he no longer wanted it. He had almost believed it.
It was almost midnight. Everyone had gone home. Catherine was collecting the last of the recycling when she passed the glass wall of Haesol's office and stopped. He was sitting alone in the dark. No lights, no phone, just a man staring at a framed photo on his desk, turning it slowly in his hands. On the desk beside him sat a dinner brought in hours ago, completely untouched and long gone cold. Beside him sat an older man with silver hair and a kind, tired face. He had a hand on Haesol's shoulder. His name was Gerald. He had been the family's oldest advisor since Haesol could walk, the one steady presence in a life built on fear. Gerald was speaking gently, comforting him, and even through the glass, Catherine could see the sorrow on both their faces. Later, she would learn that Haesol's father was dying, and that on his deathbed, that father had arranged everything: a marriage, a bride named Seyon from another powerful family, a wedding that would tie two empires together and lock Haesol into a future he never chose. Gerald had stood beside them through it all, nodding, wise, supportive, the perfect, loyal advisor. But that night, Catherine only saw a lonely man and a plate of food nobody had touched. So the next night, she did something foolish, something that broke every rule the woman on her first day had warned her about. She cooked an extra portion at home, carried it in, and left it on the corner of his desk while he was in a meeting, covered with a cloth to keep it warm. No note, no name. She told herself it meant nothing. Haesol returned to his office at 2 in the morning and found it. He stopped in the doorway as if he had been struck. He lifted the cloth, and steam rose into the cold air, and for one dizzying moment he was 12 years old again, standing in a dark hallway, looking down at the only proof he had ever had that someone loved him. His hands were not quite steady, because in 20 years no one had done this for him. No one had made him something with their own hands and asked for nothing back. Whoever she was, she had reached into a grave he thought he had sealed forever and set something breathing loose. He did not know who left it, but he intended to find out. What he did not know, and what Catherine did not know, was that someone else had already noticed her too. High in the corner of that office, a security camera blinked red. And the next morning, Gerald sat in a quiet room, watching the footage of an unknown secretary slipping into the most dangerous man in the city's office, alone, in the dark. "Interesting," Gerald murmured, leaning back with a gentle smile. "And who might you be?" Catherine thought she had done a small, kind thing that no one would ever notice, but someone had noticed her, and in this tower, being noticed by the wrong person was the most dangerous thing of all.
Over the next weeks, Catherine kept catching things. It started small, a missing invoice that should have been in the file, then a payment that appeared twice, sent to the same account within the same week. Then a signature that did not match the others, the loops slightly wrong, the pressure too light. Then dates that had clearly been changed, the ink a shade too fresh.
One irregularity could be a mistake, two could be sloppiness, but Catherine was staring at 5, 6, 7 small wrong things, and her sharp mind could not stop connecting them. Someone is moving money, she thought, her stomach tight. Someone is moving it quietly and covering the tracks, and they are good at it. She was so focused on the papers that she did not hear the door open behind her. "Working late again?" a warm voice said. She spun around. It was Gerald, the silver-haired advisor, smiling kindly, holding 2 cups of tea. He set one down beside her, like a caring grandfather. "You have a good eye," he said gently, glancing at the files spread across her desk. "Tell me, have you found anything that troubles you?" Every instinct Catherine had ever earned in her life screamed at her at once. The old wound in her, the one that never trusted powerful men who smiled too easily, flared hot. She looked at that kind face and felt the floor go cold beneath her. "No," she said carefully, sliding a blank report over the files. "Just checking my own math. I get things wrong sometimes." Gerald studied her for a long moment. Then his smile widened. "Of course, we all make mistakes. Get some rest." He left. Catherine sat frozen, heart pounding. She had just lied to one of the most powerful men in the building, and she did not fully know why. She only knew that the tea beside her was still warm and her hands were shaking. She had found the thread, and the man who had woven the whole trap now knew that she had found it.
2 days later, 10 days before the wedding, the power went out. Catherine was in the elevator when it lurched and stopped between floors, plunging into darkness. The emergency light flickered on, dim and red, and she was not alone. Haesol stood in the corner. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the tower groaned as a storm battered the glass outside, and Catherine let out a shaky breath. "It was you," Haesol said quietly. "The food. It was you." She stiffened. "I do not know what you mean, sir." "You do," he said. "No one in this building would do that. They are all too afraid of me." He paused. "Why were you not afraid?" Catherine looked at him in the red light, and for once her walls slipped. "Because you looked like a man who had not eaten in days," she said. "And where I come from, you do not let a person go hungry just because they are powerful, even if they scare everyone else half to death." Something in his stone face cracked. They stayed trapped in that small space for 2 hours, and in the dark, with no guards, no titles, no empire, they simply talked. She learned he had lost his mother young. He learned she had left her whole life in another city to start over. When the elevator finally jolted back to life, something had shifted between them that neither could name. But as the doors opened, Haesol caught her wrist gently. "Miss Cook," he said, "those files you've been reviewing, stop tonight. Put them back and do not touch them again." She pulled her arm free, heart racing. "Why?" "Because the last person who looked too closely at this family's business is not with us anymore, and I would very much like for you to stay." Then he walked out, leaving her cold all over. He knew what she had found, and instead of protecting her, part of her whispered maybe he was simply warning her to stay useful and silent. That old wound opened again. Do not trust the powerful man, no matter how kind his eyes look in the dark. 3 days after the elevator, it rained again. Catherine stayed late without meaning to. When she finally stepped out of the tower, the downpour was so heavy she could barely see the street. She stood under the awning, hunting through her bag for an umbrella she already knew she had forgotten, and sighed. A voice spoke from beside her. "I will walk you to your car." She turned. Haesol. No guards, no coat over his shoulders even now. Just him, holding a single black umbrella, already opening it. "You do not have to do that," she said quickly.
People will talk. And you are—" She stopped herself. "You are getting married soon." "I know what I am," he said. "Come on. It is only rain." So they walked, slowly, closer than they needed to be, sharing one umbrella across a dark parking lot while the storm roared around them. Neither said a word about files or money or danger. For a few dozen steps, there was no empire and no wedding, only the sound of rain and two people trying not to look at each other. At her car, she fumbled for her keys. He reached out at the same time to steady the umbrella, and his hand ended up a breath from her face, brushing a wet curled back before he even knew he had moved. They both went still. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it over the rain. For one long, aching second, the whole world narrowed to the space between them, and he almost closed it. Then he pulled his hand back. "Good night, Miss Cook. Drive safely." He turned and walked back into the storm without the umbrella, leaving it in her hands. Catherine stood there in the rain, holding it, watching the most dangerous man in the city disappear into the dark, and hating how badly she had wanted him to stay. 7 days before the wedding, the invitations arrived. Catherine watched a box of them get carried past her desk, thick cream paper with 2 names pressed in gold, Haesol and Se-yun. Then came the photographs for the announcement. A beautiful woman in an elegant gown, standing beside the man who had shared an umbrella with her in the rain, and almost reached for her. She kept her face still all day. She did not let one single thing show. And then she went home, shut her door, and fell apart quietly where no one could see. In the back of her closet, she kept an old apron, faded blue, worn soft, the ties frayed at the ends. It had been her mother's. Her mother, who used to say that a woman who feeds people never goes unloved, that kindness always finds its way home eventually. She took it out and held it against her chest and sat down on her kitchen floor. "You are a grown woman," she whispered to herself, furious that her eyes were burning. "You knew exactly what he was. You knew he was promised to someone. You knew he was dangerous. You do not get to cry over a man who was never going to be yours." But she had felt it, in the elevator, under the umbrella, that single second when his hand hovered by her cheek and the whole world went quiet. She had felt something real, and now she was going to have to watch it walk down an aisle to somebody else. "Mama," she said to the empty kitchen, still gripping the apron, "I think I fed the wrong lonely man." Across the city, at her own engagement party that same evening, a woman named Se-yun stood at the edge of a beautiful room full of powerful people, holding a glass she never drank from. She watched the door the whole night for a groom who arrived late, distracted, checking his phone, his mind clearly somewhere far across the city. Nobody else noticed, but Se-yun did. She set her glass down untouched and thought quietly that she was about to marry a man whose heart was already standing in another room, and some small, brave part of her began that night to wonder what she was willing to do about it. That was where everything shattered. Gerald called Catherine into a private office the next morning. His kind face was full of sorrow. On the desk between them sat a folder, and inside were copies of confidential financial documents, the stolen kind, the dangerous kind.
"Catherine," he said softly, so gently it made her sick. "These were found on the office system, accessed from your login, at night when you were alone." He shook his head slowly. "I wanted to believe there was an explanation. I truly did."
The blood drained from her face. "That is not true," she whispered. "I never took anything. I only noticed things that were wrong. You know I did. You were there." Gerald's eyes were full of pity, and underneath the pity, something cold and pleased. "I am afraid it does not look that way," he said. "And in this family, the people who steal secrets do not simply get fired, my dear. They disappear." He let that word hang in the air. "But I am fond of you, so here is what I will do. You will resign tonight quietly. You will leave the city, and you will never contact anyone here again. Do that, and I will make sure you are safe. Refuse, and I cannot protect you from what comes next." And there it was. The villain who had smiled and brought her tea had built a cage around her so perfectly that no one would ever see the bars. He had framed her, and now he was using the very danger of Haesol's world to force her out before she could expose him. Catherine understood in that moment exactly who had moved all that money, and she understood that no one would ever believe her over the beloved old advisor. She was the outsider, the new one, the one they had all warned would come to a bad end. She thought of Haesol, of the umbrella, of his hand by her cheek, and her deepest wound made her the choice. "He is one of them," she thought, tears burning. "He warned me to stay quiet. He's marrying his empire in a week. He was never going to choose me. I was a fool." So she made her flaw into a decision. She ran. She resigned that very night. She did not go to Haesol. She did not fight. She packed her small apartment and told herself she was being smart, when really she was just being afraid.
Haesol found out she had resigned the next morning. He stood at her empty desk, and the guards around him watched in silence as something they had never seen crossed his face. Not anger, not cold calculation, something closer to fear. "Where is she?" he said quietly. "She resigned, sir," someone offered. "Personal reasons, effective immediately." Haesol went very still. Catherine Cook did not run from anything. He had watched her stand her ground in a dark elevator with the most dangerous man in the city and lecture him about hunger. Women like that did not vanish overnight for personal reasons. Someone had moved her. Someone had frightened her badly enough to make her run. He pulled the security footage himself, and there in a private office he watched Gerald slide a folder across a desk. He could not hear the words. He did not need to. He saw Catherine's face go white. He saw her shake her head. He saw the exact moment a good woman was broken by a smiling man. And then Haesol understood everything. The signatures that did not match, the doubled payments, the advisor who had encouraged this wedding so warmly, who had comforted him so gently after his father's illness, who had been just a little too eager to see Haesol tied down and looking the other way. Gerald had not been protecting the family. Gerald had been robbing it patiently for years, waiting for the wedding to lock Haesol into duty so the empire could be quietly carried off in pieces. "If you have made it this far with me, I want you to do one small thing. Drop a comment below and tell me one word, stay, just so I know who is still walking this road with Catherine and Haesol, because the hardest part of their journey is still ahead. Now let us keep going."
3 days before the wedding, Haesol went to work with a plan. He did not confront Gerald, not yet. That would only make the old man run. Instead, he moved quietly, the way he had been raised to move.
He pulled records, he traced accounts, he gathered every doubled payment, every altered date, every wrong signature that Catherine first noticed, and he built them into something no smiling face could talk its way out of. But he needed one thing he did not have, the final piece, the proof of who had actually accessed the system on the nights the theft happened. And that proof, it turned out, only one person had ever quietly copied and kept as protection: Catherine. Because before she ran, in her last hour at that desk, some stubborn part of her refused to be erased without a trace. She had saved everything. Not to use it, just so that somewhere in the world the truth still existed. Haesol found her small new apartment on the far side of the city. He did not send guards, he went himself. He knocked, and when she opened the door and saw who it was, her face closed like a slammed gate. "Whatever you came to say," she said, "I am done. I resigned. I left. Tell Gerald he won." "Gerald framed you," Haesol said. She froze. "I know," he went on, his voice low and urgent. "I saw the footage. I know he moved the money. I know he forced you out because you were the only one who saw it. I am tearing him apart, but I need the proof, and I think you have it." For a moment, hope flickered in her eyes. Then the old wound slammed it shut. "So that is why you are here," she said bitterly. "Not for me, for your files. You need the outsider one more time, and then you go back and marry your empire." She shook her head. "Get your proof somewhere else. I am not your tool." And she shut the door in his face.
2 days before the wedding, someone knocked on Catherine's door. It was not Haesol. It was So-Yun, the bride. Catherine let her in only out of shock. The two women sat across from each other, the elegant fiancé and the woman who had run, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I know who you are," So-Yun said finally. "I have known for weeks. At my own engagement party, I watched him arrive late and distracted, checking his phone, his mind somewhere across the city. I have watched a man who was made of stone start to thaw, and I knew it was not because of me." She took a breath. "I do not love him. I never did. This marriage was arranged for me, too. I am as trapped as he is, maybe more." Catherine stared at her. "Then why are you here?" "Because I do not want to marry a man whose heart is standing in this room," So-Yun said quietly, "and because I found something you should see." She placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents So-Yun had quietly gathered from her own family side, proof that Gerald had been arranging this wedding not to unite two houses, but to weaken both and take everything for himself. The final piece, the motive in black and white. "You have the proof of what he did," So-Yun said. "I have the proof of why. Apart, we each have half a story. Together, we have all of it." She looked at Catherine steadily. "He came to you for the evidence. I'm asking you to use it yourself. Do not hand it to a man and let him save you. Walk in there and end it with your own hands." And for the first time since she ran, Catherine felt her fear turn into something harder and brighter: anger, purpose, her own choice. She had spent her whole life being erased by powerful men. Not this time.
The night before the wedding, the great hall filled with hundreds of powerful people. Glasses were raised. Gerald stood at the center of it all, silver-haired and beloved, smiling as his years of patient work slid perfectly into place. One more night, one wedding, and the empire would be his in all but name. Haesol sat at the head table in his tuxedo, and he had never felt more like a man in a cage. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Catherine walked in, not as a secretary, not as an outsider. She walked the length of that silent hall in a deep red dress, her chin high, a folder in her hands, and every powerful head in the room turned to watch this woman they had all overlooked. Behind her came Seyon, the bride, walking away from her own wedding to stand beside her. Gerald's smile faltered for the first time. Catherine stopped in front of the head table. She did not look at Haesol. She looked at the room. "My name is Catherine Cook," she said, her voice ringing clear. "Most of you never bothered to learn it. For weeks I noticed money going missing from this family. Doubled payments, forged signatures, altered dates, and when I got too close, this man," she pointed at Gerald, "framed me for the very crime he committed and forced me to run so no one would ever hear what I found." Gerald laughed gently, spreading his hands. A distraught former employee, a resignation, sad but hardly worth. Catherine set her folder on the table and opened it. Then Seyon set hers beside it. "This is every transaction, and this is every reason. Together they show exactly what you took and exactly why you wanted this wedding." Silence fell like a blade. Then Haesol stood. He did not shout. He simply looked at Gerald, the way he had once looked at a rival until the man could not hold his glass, and said in a voice quiet enough to freeze the hall, "You comforted me at my father's bedside, and you were stealing from him the whole time." For a moment, the kind old mask stayed in place, and then, slowly, it slid off, and what rose underneath was something colder and uglier than anything in that room had ever imagined.
"Comforted you," Gerald repeated softly. He was not smiling now. His voice shook with bitterness 30 years deep. "I raised you. I built this family while your father drank and your grandfather gambled. Every deal that kept you rich, I made. Every enemy that vanished, I handled. And what did I get? A chair beside the throne, advisor, a servant with a nice title." He looked around the hall, at all the powerful faces staring at him. "I did not steal anything. I collected what I was owed. This empire was mine long before it was ever his. I only came to take my name back." "You came to take," Haesol said quietly, "and you were willing to break an innocent woman to do it." Gerald's eyes flicked to Catherine, and his lip curled. She, he spat, was a secretary, nobody, a woman no one in this room could even be bothered to look at. He shook his head slowly. "That was my one mistake. I never thought the invisible one would be the thing that undid me." "You never do," Catherine said. Gerald turned to leave with his chin still high, and even then he tried one last time, his voice dropping to a poisoned whisper as he passed Haesol. "Think carefully. You need me. You do not know how any of this runs. Marry the girl, keep me close, and we forget this ever happened. Throw me out and watch how fast it all falls apart without me." Haesol looked at him for a long moment. Then he said simply, "We will manage." And he lifted one hand, the smallest gesture, and the men who'd spent 30 years answering to Gerald's voice stepped forward and answered to Haesol's voice instead. It ended for Gerald not with chaos, but with something worse for a man like him. Silence. By morning, his name was struck from every account, every deed, every document he'd spent 30 years attaching it to. The families who'd feared and flattered him for decades were shown the proof, and one by one they turned their backs, the way powerful people always do the moment power leaves the room. He was removed from the family publicly, stripped of every title, barred from every door that once opened at his approach. The man who could not stand being merely an advisor spent the rest of his days as something far smaller, forgotten. He had wanted his name back. In the end, it was the one thing he lost completely.
And so we return to where we began. The rain, the black car, the man in the tuxedo standing at a small, warm door in the middle of the night. The wedding was gone. Gerald was undone. Seyan had walked free from a marriage she never wanted. And Haesol had walked out of that hall into the storm, unable to think of anywhere to go but one small door on the far side of the city. Now Catherine stood in that doorway, flower on her hands, looking at the man who had thrown his whole world away, and she was not sure whether to let him in. "You," she said coldly, "you have some nerve showing up here." "Please," he said. She did not move. "You needed my evidence," you said. "You got it. So why are you here, Haesol? Tell me the truth, just once." The rain ran down his face, and the most feared man in the city, who had never once in his life explained himself to anyone, did. "I am not here for the evidence," he said. "You already used it yourself. You did not need me to save you. You saved everyone." He swallowed. "When I was 12, my mother used to leave food outside my door, covered to keep it warm. No note. Then she died, and no one ever did it again. 20 years, Catherine, and then one night I walked into my office, and there it was." He shook his head slowly. "I did not fall for a secretary. I fell for the only person since I was a child who ever thought I was worth feeding. I am not asking you to trust me tonight. I lied by staying silent when I should have warned you. But I could not marry anyone in that hall while you were out here in the dark, thinking you meant nothing." Catherine looked at him for a long, long moment. The old wound in her, the one that had run from every powerful man who ever smiled, sat quiet at last, because this man was not smiling. He was soaked and shaking and honest. "Do not think one storm fixes this," she said finally. "I do not," he said. She stepped back from the door. "Then dry off before you drip on my floor," she said, and she let him in.
Months passed. Gerald was gone, undone by the two women he had been too proud to fear. The empire was quieter now and cleaner. Seyon became something no one expected, not a rival, but a friend, free at last to build a life she actually chose. And Catherine did not simply fall into Haesol's arms. She made him earn it, week by week. She made him show her the man he wanted to become instead of the one he had been raised to be. She did not let him buy her, or dazzle her, or rescue her. She let him show up again and again until showing up became the truest thing about him. Then, one evening, there came a knock at her door. She opened it, and there stood Haesol. No tuxedo this time, no black car idling at the curb, no guards clearing the way, no empire standing behind him. Just a man in a plain coat, holding nothing, having left it all behind to be here. He looked at her, this woman who had been invisible and made the whole world see her, and he asked her the only question that had ever really mattered. "May I come in?" And Catherine, who had spent her whole life being told she was too much and never enough, who had run once and would never run again, smiled
and opened the door wide. "Yes," she said, "you may." Somewhere in your life, there is a door you were told to stop knocking on, a room where they never bothered to learn your name. Catherine ran from hers once when she should have stayed and fought, and then she walked back through the front door of the very place that erased her, in a red dress, and said her own name out loud. Tell me in the comments if you have ever had to knock on that door again.